Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tony N.E.S.P.R. Welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural with your hosts, Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go into a very fascinating case to start. The case of Florence Viner, who lived in a haunted house and had some terrible incidences happen. Questions have been asked of us, of Ed and Lorraine. What do you do when you see a ghost? What do you do if you see a ghost? Those questions and many others will be answered for you tonight. I'd like to start with Mr. Warren, if I could. Ed, I know you're going to talk about the Viner case, but can you tell us, what would someone do if they encountered a ghost?
Well, Tony, it would all depend on the circumstances, the situation, the whole thing. If you're in a car like Rod Vesey was, driving along at 1:30 in the morning and a ghost suddenly appears alongside of you in the car, what can you do? You know, and it comes so fast, and then the apparition disappears quickly. So by the time that you're trying to figure out what you should do, it's already gone, you know. And some people, of course, would just be very startled. But if you're, say, a Christian, you're lying in bed, and something wakes you up, and you look out into the darkness, and you see a ghostly figure there, a woman, a man, whatever it might be, you simply make the sign of the cross in the direction that you're looking at it, and you would say, in the name of God, is there something that I can help you with? You shouldn't really hold a lot of communication with spirits, but in some cases you're dealing with earthbound spirits, people who are very confused when they died. They don't understand why they're not in that physical body anymore, and they're drawn to the aura of a very sensitive person. And during the sleeping state, as you wake up, you are in a good situation where a spirit can reach you, because you're on that same astral level. So I would suggest that you simply say, in the name of God, is there something that I can do to help you? If it's an evil spirit, it will disappear immediately. If it's a positive one, say it's a relative or some spirit that's just been drawn to you, then you might get some communication. I know there's been people that have seen spirits of children, of adults, and they get very frightened, and they'll jump up and run out of the room. Well, that's natural reaction for most people. But actually, what you should do is to find out what it is, what they want. It's kind of like this woman over in Torrington. It was her own husband that would show up. And she woke up one night soon after he died, about 6 months later, which I think was beautiful, but it scared her. And he would be sitting right in the chair, just like you're sitting there. And he would say, "Are you all right, dear?" And she got so frightened, she jumped out of bed and ran out of the house and wouldn't come back for a few days. And then the same thing happened when she went back in again. She jumped out of bed and ran right, you know, out of the house again. So the third time, her daughter said, "Mom, why don't you just ask Dad what he wants, or tell him that you are perfectly all right?" Which she did, and she seen him get up. He was sitting in a chair. He got up, he walked down the hallway, and she never seen him again. But he was disturbed by the fact that something was bothering the wife, which of course it would be. He was trying to put her mind at ease. Say, for instance, you encounter a spirit in a haunted house.
Right.
And it's one that's a very negative spirit. In that case, you're not going to hang around and ask what it wants, because you're going to be frightened out of your wits. So in them kind of cases, I simply say, get out of the house yourself, leave, you know. There are spirits that can do great physical harm to people. In tonight's presentation, we're going to be talking about a house in Woodstock, Connecticut, which is almost on the Massachusetts border. Very interesting case. Mrs. Florence Viner, who was, I think she was Miss Connecticut or Miss...
She was Miss Connecticut
at one time. Very pretty looking lady. And she got married to an older man. They bought this old inn, an old Revolutionary inn it was, not realizing it, that it was very haunted. And soon after they moved in, they had the farm hands, some of them who would live upstairs in this home. And the farm hands would go to bed with knives under their pillows. One even had a gun, and they said, "Well, why do you have knives? Why do you have guns?" And they said, "Well, we're frightened to stay up there, Mrs. Viner." She said, "Frightened of what?" They told her that, you know, the doors would open and close, the beds would shake, they were scared, they would hear somebody running up the stairs, they would hear what sounded like a fight between two men going on, they would hear the clash of swords, and this would really frighten them. So one night she was home alone, and her husband didn't come home yet. She was waiting for him to come home, and all of a sudden she heard something open the door, pounding on the door, open the door, footsteps ran up these stairs. Then she heard what sounded like a fight between two men, and then two thumps. Well, she said that, you know, she was so frightened, she went in and she got her .22 revolver.
Jeez.
She went upstairs, but she couldn't find anything. Came down again, and then she told about other incidents occurring where she would be lying in bed, and suddenly she would hear this loud roaring sound. She said it sounded almost like a foundry. And her husband wouldn't hear a thing. He would be almost like in a state of thantomania, paralyzation. She couldn't even wake him up. Then she would see this here glow, and it would form into a ball, electromagnetic ghost ball, and then it would go into a cigar shape, and she'd see this dark form moving all around the room, a shadow ghost.
But I think it's important, Tony, to realize, or for our viewers to realize, like Ed just gave reference to her husband and how he was affected. That is very, very common. The majority of the cases that are brought to our attention, they will tell us the woman of the house. Remember that women are more sensitive, so women
Lorraine, I have to
perceive
correct you.
things.
They're not patients, they're clients. If they're patients, they'd be in a mental institution.
What patients?
You said patients, didn't you?
No, I said
Edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. You are now standing in one of the most haunted houses in the world. Allow me to show you the Halloween room of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Here you see some of the artifacts, some of the collections throughout the years that Ed has gotten, some skulls, things from ancient Scotland. And we're going to come around this way, and we're going to look at some more objects of Halloween. These are a lot of collections that Ed got through the years from people who've generously given to him on his birthday, and haunted houses, and people who've just known that Ed was an aficionado of Halloween. As we walk down this way, you can see his latest, which is a big monster figure that he got on Ed's 70th anniversary, I should say 70th birthday. And over here is a giant birthday card that was offered to him on his 70th birthday on September 7th. But this is a fun room, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said before, welcome. My name is Tony N.E.S.P.R. We will now be entering the haunted passageway, perhaps entering the most horrific part of any area, any square mileage of any part of this world. So come on with me, and we're going to walk through the haunted passageway. I would never do this if it was after 9 o'clock at night. Follow me through here, Rob. As you can see here, it looks almost like a dungeon as we progress through this haunted passageway. Sounds like the Hound of the Baskervilles. A lot of Ed's paintings are hanging on the wall that he's done throughout his 40 some odd years of painting. Now we're entering probably the most horrific part right here. This is the Occult Museum, perhaps the most haunted area, I would consider the most haunted area in the world. Over 45 years of collections of voodoo dolls, occult practice objects, satanic ritual objects, witchcraft objects. I would have to say, with all due caution to viewers, it's not a place you'd want to stay at night. It's not a place you'd want to stay for any length of time. We're going to take the time for the tour. It's before 9 o'clock, so we're all set. Between 9 p.m. and 6 p.m., 6 a.m., it really gets bad. But I consider this to be the most haunted area in the world as we enter. perhaps the most haunted area in the world. That's what I would say.
I would say that it is one of the most haunted areas because of the many things here, Tony, that come from all parts of the world. Europe, Asia, America, Canada, Mexico. This is a collection of items on the occult that have been used in diabolical experiences by many different types of people into black magic, wizardry, sorcery, and so forth.
These are all things that you then would consider evil, Ed?
Oh, positively. In fact, this is not a building that you should be in after 9 o'clock at night. From 9 to 6 are the psychic hours. This is not a Halloween room. This is the real thing.
Okay.
Many of the objects in this room here have had dire effects on people. People have been maimed, have been killed. People have wound up in mental institutions because of many of the things they write in this building here. You have the voodoo dolls, you have the Raggedy Ann doll, which was responsible for the death of a young man who came in here one time, who challenged the doll to do its worst, and it did. Then you have a detective who was almost killed right in this room that we're standing in, and a priest.
When we first panned in this room, I guess Rob was on The Witch. Can you tell us a little bit about what...
Yeah, that's a model mannequin of Hannah Crana, our local witch, who died in 1845. Many of the farmers over on Cross Hill Road, which is just about maybe a quarter of a mile from here, would go along in the morning, and she'd sit up on this big rock, and she would say to them, if you don't have a pie for me tomorrow morning, or a dozen eggs or a hen, I'll curse you. These guys were so afraid of it that they would have that hen or that pie. And the Indians in this area were so frightened of her that they left here. It's also said that she did murder her husband, who was Joseph Hovey. He was an officer in the local, I guess, what do you call that?
Constabulary?
Yeah.
Militia?
Militia, that's it.
Oh, okay, Ed, to the right of Hannah, I see there's a mirror. Can you tell me about that mirror?
That's a magic mirror that a gentleman used in New Jersey to conjure up spirits. That mirror, as we know, is a reflection of spirits.
Okay.
Ghosts, apparitions, demons, devils can reflect their images on a shiny surface very easily. This was used for that purpose, only the man who did the conjuring, unfortunately, today is in a mental institution.
Wow. Okay, why don't we step over this way?
How about this organ right here? That's an interesting piece.
I didn't know.
That was in the most haunted house in all of New England, which was Stratford, Connecticut. And they called it the Stratford Rappings. It was so famous, Tony, that they actually had in 1850 a carriage at the Bridgeport Police, or the railroad station, and it would take people all the way to Stratford to see these hauntings, which was the Reverend Phelps house. This is a painting I did of it down here. And Hannah Crana, the witch, and another witch by the name of Goody Bassett were very involved in black magic at that time. In fact, Goody Bassett was hung near the old railroad station for her witchcraft practices. But this organ was in that house for many years. A gentleman had purchased it. He collected organs, but when it started playing on its own, he wanted to get rid of it. And he called me up and told me where it came from, and he'd like to get rid of it, so I took it. And we've heard this organ play 3 times, the strains of it coming up through the passageway, into our Halloween room, up the stairs, and into our bedroom.
Wow, that's amazing, Ed. Ed, I want to point out these statues, or what?
Yes.
Voodoo dolls?
These are fertility dolls from Africa. Over here you see the one which is covered with human blood, and there are 7 of them that were stolen from a witch doctor. You do not steal things from witch doctors ever. Now, the man who stole them died a terrible death. The man he sent them to, who was right in Bridgeport, Connecticut, he and his wife suffered for 2 years and then finally died. You don't steal things from witch doctors.
I'd say not. Why don't we head over this way? But while we're heading this way right here, I see this book here. This book, it says Book of Shadows, Necromonicon. Can you tell me what that is?
Yes, that's one of the original books of shadows, which were written in the medieval days. And this one here was translated into English. Just the reading of that book has had terrible results for many people. This is not a book that anyone should ever buy, a book of shadows. It goes into the incantations of devils and demons and rituals.
Okay, what else? Does this signify anything here?
All right, you notice there's a mask here. It's a typical Halloween mask.
Right.
But the problem with this is that many people buy these masks and they use them actually in black magic. This one was put on a person's head. They looked into a mirror. They took the mask off and they visualized themselves as looking like this. They created a physical manifestation of a tulpa.
Wow. Isn't that wild? This here scares me. This one right here, Ed. The Raggedy Ann doll.
Yes. That's probably the worst thing we have in this whole museum. That Raggedy Ann doll was given to a nurse in 1970 by her mother as a Christmas present. But as most girls do, even 28 years old, she would take the doll to bed with her, wrap her arm around, and go to sleep. I do the same thing with a pillow. But then she started taking it to the breakfast nook, where the arms one morning went onto the table. Now, she lived with another nurse, and they shared the expenses of the apartment, which was 4 blocks away from Hartford Hospital.
Right.
At that point, they told the girls about the incident, and one said, "I know a medium." So they held a seance that night. That was the beginning of many seances with this doll. They would come home at night, and the woman had told them, the medium, that there was a spirit of a 6-year-old child in the doll by the name of Annabelle, who had been killed outside of their apartment house in an automobile accident. Well, there was such a child, but God does not allow a child's spirit to go into a doll. This was a devil, a demon, inside the doll, which was impersonating the spirit of a child. Well, they treated it like it wasn't.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your host, Tony N.E.S.P.R, along with Ed and Lorraine Warren tonight. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a little frightening. Frightening in the sense that it happened in a small town of West Pittston, Pennsylvania. And what happened in that small town curls my hair when I think about what happened to Jack and Janet Smurl, just a regular family that worked hard and tried to make a living for their family. It was a nightmarish experience. Happened approximately 10 years ago, 1986. There is a book on it that was written about the case, The Haunted, by Ed and Lorraine Warren and Robert Curran. Ed and Lorraine will talk about this case tonight, but I have to say that it's probably one of the most frightening cases I've ever read about, because the horrible attacks that happened to Jack and Janet, you just don't want to go to bed at night. So I'd like to open this show with Ed Warren, if I could, and he would explain how he got called and how he got involved in the case. Ed, can you tell us how you started?
Yeah. I also would like to mention that this was a movie of the week. And that movie was done beautifully. The Smurl family insisted that there be no fabrication in that movie at all, no Hollywood hype. And it was one of the most frightening cases we've ever been involved in. But I'll never forget the family calling us up, us driving up to West Pittston, and going in. And as a religious demonologist, I do carry relics of saints. I carry a true piece of the cross. And about a half hour after I interviewed this family, they told us amazing things. First, how when they moved into the home with the grandparents, this was a duplex house, as you'll see. It's in a coal mining area. And they felt, well, maybe something was happening underneath because of the old mine shafts. But the things that were happening would be when Janet would go down into the basement to do the wash. And she'd hear somebody calling, "Janet, Janet." And she thought, sounds like my mother. So she'd run all the way upstairs. She said, "Yes, Mom, what is it you want?" No mother there. And then she would hear strange sounds from the different corners of the cellar. One of her daughters was making Holy Confirmation. This is a religious rite in Catholicism. And the girl came into the kitchen, and they were all excited about going to the church and having the confirmation. There's a huge light up on the ceiling.
Now that is bolted to the main beams that are in the kitchen, Tony. That light. Big, heavy bolts right into the main beam.
Now this light started to just shake, tore itself loose, and almost hit the girl. That, of course, was very unnatural. They checked everything. There was no way that that should have come off there. Then there was all kinds of trouble with the electric. Everything was going kaplooey. Television sets, toasters were burning. Wiring that they had just put in the house was just going dead. They couldn't understand it because Jack's father is an electrician. He put all of this in himself in his own house. And you know, a man that does his own home, he's got to do a good job. Well, from that point on, they lying in bed one night, and all of a sudden, the bed starts to rattle and shake. Then they start seeing black shadows moving across the bedroom. Jack and Janet are lying in bed, and suddenly, she's talking, and something grabs her by the leg and yanks her right out of the bed onto the floor. Jack at first didn't believe all these things until he heard the voices himself. He's seen his wife being dragged out of bed. Then there's the night when both of them are lying in bed, and both of them rise up into the air, up as high as the ceiling.
Just like the Lutz family in Amityville, Long Island, Tony.
And they're dropped onto the bed. We went there, and a half hour after I was there, I used religious provocation. We went up into their bedroom.
Yeah, let me tell you about that. We sat on the edge
Why
of the bed.
can't I tell them?
We sat on the edge of the bed.
You could repeat it later if you'd like.
And we sat on the edge of the bed, and Ed put out these different things he had with him, which were all relics and things like that. And he put them on the bed.
I was also playing hymns
Yes.
from nuns, you know, beautiful music.
Religious music.
Yes,
Ave
religious
Maria,
music.
Things that would really frustrate a devil.
Why?
That's what I was trying to do.
Why would that do? Why would it frustrate a devil? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Seekers of the Supernatural. I'm your moderator, Tony N.E.S.P.R, with hosts Ed and Lorraine Warren, and also tonight we have a special guest, Mr. John Zaffis. He's also a psychic investigator who has worked with Ed and Lorraine Warren for over 20 years. And tonight's program will be about a haunted home, but unlike any home that you've ever been in, unlike any home that you've ever witnessed or read about, except in one of Ed's and Lorraine's books, for it is a haunted funeral home, one that happened right in our own backyard of Southington, Connecticut in 1988, the home of Carmen and Al Snedeker. Now this home was haunted by different kinds of spirits that we'll get into. We'd like to start the program immediately off with Ed and Lorraine and also with John, because John spent, I believe he'll explain, about 9 weeks in that home, day and night. So I'd like to start it out with Ed, if I could. Ed, can you tell us about the case, how it started, how you got involved?
Well, of course, we got involved through Mrs. Snedeker, who called our home and told us that she was terribly frightened, that things were occurring to them, that they were seeing ghosts, they were being physically hurt, even attacked sexually. And when she told me that it was a funeral home, I suspected that what they call necrophilia, which would be an abuse of a dead body, occurred. Now, in this particular funeral home, we don't feel that it was the undertakers that did this. You have itinerant embalmers from time to time who will help out these people. We think it was one of them. But what happened was that a body was abused, or maybe more than one. And we know that this can bring about terrible phenomena and hauntings in such a house. It seems that this lady, Mrs. Snedeker, lived up north, northern New York. She had a young son. I think he was around 15 years old. He had cancer, and she wanted to get him closer to New Haven, Hartford area. So she brought the boy down here, and he went into the hospital, but it was very hard for them to drive over 100 miles every time they had to bring the boy back and forth. So she looked for a rent, and she came across this house one day. She could see builders in there They were loading lumber, taking things out, fixing it all up. She had no idea that this was a funeral home at one time. And she walked in and she asked the workers there if it was going to be a rent, and they said yes. She asked who owned it, and she called the owner, and she told him that she would like to rent it. Well, he never told her that it was a funeral home. And down in the basement, on the bottom floor, the instruments they use for embalming, the embalming table, the chain hoist, everything was still there.
Mm-hmm.
But there was lumber all over the stairs, so Mrs. Snedeker couldn't get down those stairs to see what was down there.
Okay.
They just told her that everything would be cleared up by the time she moved in, and they could live down there. There was also what they called the sales coffin room, where they put the caskets, and these would be
like a display room.
Wow.
That's what they called it, a playroom. It was it's a
No, display room, honey.
And it did wind up to be a playroom for the kids, though. The son actually slept down there, not knowing that this was a coffin display room. And he started complaining that he would see ghosts. Mm-hmm. And the mother and father felt that, he was either hallucinating, imagining, or something. But by this time, they had discovered the fact that it was a funeral home. The tables were still there, all the instruments were there, the chain hoist was there. And of course, when they confronted the landlord, he said, well, there's nothing to worry about. I mean, it's not a funeral home anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But what these people went through was horrendous. There would be physical attacks to the extent that I was sitting there one night, and I felt as though I was being jabbed by a long needle, almost like these wool needles, what do they call them?
A knitting needle?
Like a knitting needle.
And the pain was terrible. And actual rapes took place of both women that were there. One was a young niece.
A niece that Carmen had her niece, Tony, living with her. Now, when you say that there was more than one type of spirit in this house, you were right. It all started out looking like there could have been human spirits. They would see human spirits. Even our researchers witnessed human spirits. Mm-hmm. But there was something altogether different. Besides that human element, there was something inhuman or very, very negative.
Now, you guys said their women were attacked. You're saying physically raped? How did that happen? How did that work?
Well, actually, in this case, both the niece and Carmen and her husband, Al, all were raped in this house.
So that was the niece was the first one to start complaining about feeling something sexual happening to her.
Well, the night that, let me go back to that very first night that I took the phone call in the middle of the night, Tony. I took a phone call in the middle of the night from a very hysterical